Well, Professor Lucas, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Peter. How are you doing, brother?
I'm good. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Pete Deely, and this is the first Jiu Jitsu Mindset podcast of 2023. So if you're listening in the distant future and it's episode 1000, this one is all the way back after we've done about 50 episodes now, or excuse me, about 22 episodes, Professor. So we're moving along and getting the word out.
No, it's
So
been awesome. 22 already. It's been fun.
yeah, it has
Looking
been a lot
forward
of fun.
for 2023. How was your first week of the year, Peter?
So, I have all these friends that just listen to this podcast and they like to write me and text me, tell me what a terrible businessman I am for not turning this podcast into some business rather than a project. So the first year brings with it this resolution. By June, we will have 24 subscribers to our submission coffee. So that's what I've been berated sufficiently that. So we have 22 to go. So dear listener, should you want to save me from the humiliation of my friends, please go to awellrunlife.com and subscribe to Submission Coffee. So that's how so I've been beat up by my buddies. Other than that, it's been a great year. How about you? Have things started good?
Yes, great week for sure. A lot of work, a lot of training, a lot of classes. So that looks like dictating how the year is gonna be.
Right.
And if it's like that, it's gonna be great. It's gonna be awesome year for sure.
Well, congratulations for those of you who are local to us. That Professor Lucas and the team are opening the second location in Queen Creek. So
Yes.
those of you who know us in Chandler, we're going to celebrate that. Well, Professor Lucas, we have very lucky today. We get to talk to somebody that is a fascinating person. He has his own podcast in addition to a jiu-jitsu he's coaches physically, but he coaches people otherwise as well. He coaches people in an entrepreneurial way, and I think he's a model for that. So we have Professor Alex Martinez, and I started when I was 50. Professor Alex started when he was 40. He's become a black belt here in Arizona, and it seems like we're going to get into this conversation, but jiu-jitsu started to get a hold of his life. He started to teach children, and then that kind of moved into growing a program from 3 to 30 students. He ultimately opens his own studio. And for those of you who like jiu-jitsu podcasts, he has an excellent podcast called the BJJ Foxcast, and you can find him on Instagram at silverfox_BJJ. Did I get that right, Professor Alex?
Yeah, you got it right. Yes, you got it right. Thank you.
So we're thrilled that you're here, and we know that your story has a lot of twists and turns, and I'm confident it's fascinating. We also know that there's hours and hours that we could talk about, and you're going to forgive me. We're just going to impose on you for about an hour today. So thanks for making time for us, and we're very grateful you're here.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I didn't realize I was going to be the first podcast of 2023. So if I wasn't nervous 5 minutes ago, I'm nervous now. So yeah. Thank you.
No pressure.
We are so lucky that you were willing to do it. And
Peter, sorry to interrupt you.
Not at all.
Are we gonna send Professor Alex a bag of the submission coffee?
Well,
reason I'm asking that is we might see each other in tournaments, so it might gonna be dangerous.
That's right. Well, we will share our secret weapon with you, Professor Alex, in submission coffee. Minus one thing we should ask: how do you prepare your coffee? I understand you're a coffee nerd in and of yourself.
I like the taste of coffee, so I don't put anything in it. I actually I love the taste of coffee. Well, it actually started when I was in the military.
Right.
The first thing we ran out of was creamer and sugar.
Right.
So you just learn to drink it, whatever you get. So
that's right. Yeah. But I mean, is it a French press? I mean, I want to get the nerd part in here. Is it a French press? You have an espresso
French
maker?
Press. Yeah, French press. But I think I've got a pour over coming, so I'm really excited about that. So I think one of my kids wants to surprise me with a pour over. So
okay, Professor Lucas, we are definitely sending him a bag then, because obviously he honors the art of coffee.
Perfect.
So I think there's so many places we could start, Professor Alex, and I'm trying to in preparation for our conversation, I wanted to ask you, what is the most common misperception about jujitsu that you encounter? Because we spend a lot of time here sort of clarifying the role that jujitsu can play in your life beyond what people might think is the obvious, the physical aspects and all of that. And so, in your journey as a teacher, as a guide, like, what do people come to you with that you often feel like, what, this person, I'm glad they're here, but they're here for not quite the right reason, in a manner of speaking, right? I mean, all motivations are okay, but do you have anything that comes to mind about that idea?
Well, I think about it. I think about it in two different perspectives. So if you think about it from an internal perspective, those that are practicing jujitsu already, I think the biggest misconception and the thing that's being lost is that, number one, it's a martial art.
Mm-hmm.
That's being lost. I feel if you look at, if you were to survey, 100 blue belts and ask them what they do, they would probably refer to it as a sport and not a martial art.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's something that's being lost. And I hope we get that back. And just like all things in jiu-jitsu, Professor Lucas, you'll attest to this. The old becomes the new again, right? Old moves that were being done 8 years ago that are kind of faded are coming back. So hopefully we start referring to our martial art as a martial art and not a sport. From a perspective of somebody coming from the outside, it's the biggest misconception is that it's it's a bunch of sharks trying to kill you, and that's a very old perspective, and it's I would say, as far as reputations go, I think we've earned that one because Professor Lucas, when he started, there was no like kiddie class, you jumped in with both feet, and it was just it was a nightmare, and only the strong survived. And if you look at it from a perspective of a business person, that's a really bad perspective because I don't want to lose a single student. And we used to wear it as a badge of honor where not everybody survived that first week or that first month.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Professor Lucas, I want you to follow up a little bit on that because I know you have a perspective on jiu-jitsu as a potential entry to the Olympics and its potential effect on the sport. So can I ask you maybe to comment on that? And then Professor Alex,
Yes,
maybe the same, I'll ask you the
absolutely.
same question.
I agree 100% of everything that Professor Alex said about all the type of perspective. This on jiu-jitsu losing a little bit the martial art aspect, right? Is something that the Gracie family talks a lot about that, right? Especially the the first, second generation of the family. It became a sport which is great for the view, right? For more people know about it, but you end up sometimes losing a little bit of values if that growth is not well guided, right? And this week, Professor Alex, I was making a comment on one of our classes that jiu-jitsu might gonna be on the next Olympic Games, okay? More as a presentation, not officially, but like as a presentation on that event. And that's 100% my point of view, right? Which is as much as great again for more people know about jiu-jitsu and try to understand a little bit more about the martial art. At the same time, on the moment that the sport, like a martial art, become Olympic, a lot of rules need to change, right? That's like there happen a lot of judo with karate with taekwondo, right? A lot of different rules for people that has no idea what those martial art is. It starts to become way more entertainment, and this is totally change the values, the history, and the right. I keep going the martial art aspect, the samurai, the bushido code, and everything else. Right. So that was I was trying to balance that off a little bit of the students on like, hey, this is great, is being calling to be on Olympics because for a reason, and I'm sure MMA and UFC, all those things happen, but at the same help. But at the same time, we need to be really careful on how we decide to grow the sport like that. To don't lose the martial art part and become only a sport, right?
Yeah, and if I could add to that, I 100% agree. And if you want to get into a political discussion, start integrating jujitsu with the U.S. Olympic Committee, right? As far as rules changing, we're going to walk into a situation where, albeit they're going to have the best intentions, a lot of things will change. So once it gets changed at the Olympic level, then it's going to come down to the IBJJF level, and then the NOGI, and then the ADCC, and everyone's going to want to conform because the Olympics is the biggest stage, period.
Yes.
So we got to be really careful how that happens, and like Professor Lucas said, how we're guided through that, and that's gonna be really, really critical in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yep.
Professor Alex, just as an aside here, one of the notion of a martial art, I'm curious, and I want to get into like how jujitsu, whether jujitsu came to you in a flash of epiphany, like it was love at first sight, or whether it happened over time. But before I ask that, because we had our local fire chief, Tom Dwiggins, was a guest once, and he was in the military as well. And for you, in your military experience, did your experience as a military man inform your approach to jujitsu as a martial art? Like, did you have a soldier's, or whatever you might, choose to describe your military kind of position, mentality in your beginning of jiu-jitsu, or was there enough room between military service and it that you approached it differently? I'm curious if there's a relationship between those two experiences.
Well, there was a big gap between the end of my military career and the beginning of jiu-jitsu, but I think the only thing that I can say that I brought with my military career, I was in the Navy, so there was a lot of cleaning and mopping, right? I wasn't a soldier carrying anything, so
Right.
so it was a very different experience. I was more of a technician, right? I worked on stuff.
Right.
So but what I hope I'm answering your question, but what the military taught me was a systematic approach to things,
Right.
and being able to be patient.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, and what I mean by that is when someone is learning a new move or a new technique or doing whatever, there's a need to understand it right away, and it's a process. It's a lifelong process. Just because you don't understand the concepts of a hip bump sweep from the guard day one, maybe year 15 you'll be an expert.
Yeah.
And that's how long it takes, right? So and that learning the ranks in the military, you have responsibilities as an E1, as an E2, as an E5, as an E7. Your responsibilities change, and it's a growth over time. I would never ask someone fresh out of boot camp to run an entire division. That's unrealistic, right? It's a lifelong process. I hope that answers your question.
It sure does. I have an opinion that, for many people, that the military experience changes their approach to other things in their life. And so, for example, in business, hiring a military person who has come through military service often brings a different set of different habits of discipline, and a different willingness to take direction and to give direction. And so as a martial art, I think sometimes we pigeonhole it into just like, oh, it's a way to attack and defend. But I think martial arts, when Professor uses the terms like the Bushido code, or the samurai, that it speaks to your whole life. How do you get up in the morning? How do you take care of your body as you eat? And in my experience, people who have come through the military have that sort of patience, in my mind, is a way to defer gratitude, what's the right word, defer the enjoyment of things, right? They can be disciplined in the pursuit of something. So when jujitsu comes to your life, is it love at first sight, and you just know, oh man, this is going to be super important to me? Or was it more incremental? Is it you tried it and then you went along? Like, what was that beginning like?
So there was a gentleman named Kevin Bunyan. He's in Arizona, and he was in nursing school with my wife. So I'm going a long way around this, and I apologize.
Take your time.
It was not love at first sight. Okay.
Okay.
So Kevin was a blue belt at the time, and he and his ex-wife, sorry, were going through nursing school with my wife. So we would hang out together, go to baseball games and stuff. Kevin would not shut up about jujitsu. And I'm sitting there, I'm rolling my eyes like, oh my gosh, if I got to sit across from this guy one more time. But I gained a lot of weight, and I got really bad shape. I mean, it was pretty bad for a person like me. I mean, I was in the military. I did triathlon. I did a lot of stuff, and I just got really heavy. And one day I just decided I've had enough and I've got to do something. And Kevin is the reason why I Googled jiu-jitsu in Mesa. And I found my instructor, Paul Nava's gym shortly after. And I knew I was in it for life my first week.
Wow.
I knew it. That's like this. I don't want to climb Everest. I don't want to swim any oceans. This is all I want to do.
On a side note, having the first experience, Professor Paul Nava is easier to like jiu-jitsu, right? He's such an amazing person and he's awesome. I like Paul Nava a lot.
Yeah. He when I walked into his academy off of a business trip. I was still in my shirt and tie, and I saw like, I knew where his academy was. So I drove in the parking lot. Hey, lights on, let's go check it out. So I walked in and the windows were fogged. I didn't know what it was. They were getting ready for pans, and I didn't know what pans meant at the time. And they're getting after it, and I'm like, this is going to probably kill me, but but I'm going to give it a try. And like Professor Lucas said, this is Paul Nava in a nutshell. He put somebody in charge of the class. He steps off the mat, and we talked for a good 10 minutes. And those conversations have been so special to me. And it's the same thing. Like, he has so much going on in his life, but he always finds time to give me 10 minutes, give me 5 minutes. And we just have such a meaningful conversation. He's one of my best friends. He's like a brother to me. And and he's an amazing guy. So yeah.
What was it in
awesome.
that first week that connected to the deeper part of you? Because that's not what you just described. Isn't like, this is fun, like, I'll enjoy it. I mean, this is something that, and clearly it gets played out because your story is a continual deepening of your relationship to jiu-jitsu. What was it that connected so deeply to you?
It kind of stemmed from the military background. When I was in the military, being on a ship, with, my division, I probably had about 16 people in my division, but those guys were my family. Those men and women were my family because we spent so much time together in probably the worst conditions. I mean, things that, like, you think people complain about, stuff now, like we didn't have water, you know what I mean? We couldn't make water. We're going through that kind of stuff in the middle of the ocean. There's no water. I don't get it. Anyway. But when you walk into Jiu-Jitsu Academy and you start really immersing yourself in that culture, it's like, I'm back in my division. I'm back with my guys and my girls, and we're just, I don't know, we're family. We travel together, we train together, we bleed together. I can't explain it to someone who hasn't done it, but it's probably some of the more meaningful relationships you'll ever have.
Professor, let me ask you this. It happened with me, and I'm sure it happens with a lot of people as well. I just didn't realize because I was 13 years old when I started, right? So we don't see the world the way how I see now. But for everything that you're saying, I'm assuming, well, like a military background, and then just now you say like the triathlons and everything. So do you believe the first thing that attracted you to jiu-jitsu was the hardcore, the grind, and later you saw all the other benefits, the true benefits that jiu-jitsu can give to us? And sometimes people are, let's use the word, like afraid to do the first shot, right? To try that again. Do you believe it was something like that happened with you, or you were able to just boom, have the big picture right away and everything?
No, you're absolutely right about that. I didn't have the big picture until maybe a couple of years in, but when I first started, it was like, first I had to survive. Like, I threw up during warm-ups like twice in the first week, and I'm like, I can't. How do people do this, right? So and then I started getting my legs under me. I started getting my lungs, and then one day you wake up and all of a sudden you're not fat. That's a special day, man. That's a really special day. And
I
then
can't
you
wait.
realize,
I
wow.
can't wait for that to happen.
but you're not just looking at yourself weight wise, you're looking at yourself performance wise. Forget about on the mats. Like, I had I had a corporate job, and I just approached things differently. What jiu-jitsu taught me early on was, you've got to be patient, and you've got to learn to control your breathing. And if you can control your breathing, you're in business, man. You are. It doesn't matter what walk of life you're in. If you can control your breathing, your brain just functions better, right? And then you can think your way through difficult things. And when you do jiu-jitsu, you're putting yourself in a position to do very difficult things all the time, all the time.
Yes.
And I'm not talking about on the mat. If I eat poorly at lunch, I'm going to suffer later. If I don't hydrate, I'm going to suffer later. I'm always doing jujitsu, whether you're on a bus, whether you're walking to work, whether you're on a bike, it doesn't matter. You're always doing jujitsu because the mats never lie. They're waiting for you, right? So
Yeah, 100%.
yeah, it's I'm very passionate about this. I'm sorry.
No, this is why
believe that-
you're in, you know, I mean, you're in good company here. I mean, that's why we're actually
Yeah,
here
all the
for,
same page. Yeah.
we're on the same page. And the term I was looking for that I was having trouble is delayed gratification, right? And so when you step on those mats that first week and you threw up at the, you know, in the warm up, if you didn't have the internal strength to recognize that I'm not always going to throw up on the mats, like this is a temporary moment, and if I continue, my experience will change. One of the things that has been what I have observed as a newcomer to it is how soon people will give up, and what a tragedy that is, because they think that how it feels right now is how it's going to feel in a year. And
Mm,
part of our motivation for doing the podcast is to tell people, first step is to go from being afraid to try it to trying it, and then second step
mm,
is don't let the first experience be the thing that makes you think it's always going to be like the first experience. And then once you're in it at, you know, a year or two and you're a blue belt, to understand that you're still have so much more to go, not just in the development as a jiu-jitsu player, but as a human being. Because as you say, at some point it gets so internalized that you recognize that what my action is at this moment is a vote for how I'm going to feel in the future. If I'm eating bad now, well, that's casting a vote for feeling bad, you know, 5 hours from now, or not sleeping tonight, or pick your, you know,
yeah.
pick you. I have to say, in terms of community, just as an aside, I've been at tournaments when your team is there. It is very evident to me that they feel a sense of like belonging with each other, and, you know, down to like their clothing and their. I was at one in particular. Actually, it was the first time that you won't remember this, but I remember seeing you. You know, your team seems to bring a very team-oriented perspective to this individual sport. And the professor and I have talked about that with our own group. Like, you know, yes, you're on the mats alone, but you get there via the community of training partners and all the rest of it. Um, when you sort of you had this love at first sight, you persisted as you went along. Can you think of a milestone that you had that you faced where you're like, do I keep going, or is this enough? Like, did you come against that, or was it always the commitment never wavered?
Well, I guess I can say that I knew I was going to do jujitsu. I knew I was going to be on those mats as often as I could, and I have a extremely supportive wife. I don't know how she didn't leave me, because I spent a lot of time on those mats. But you know, I think a turning point for me was winning my first tournament, because showing up, there was a lot of young, you know, great looking athletes that, you know, had, you know, like Professor Lucas looking guys that would
Yeah.
just destroy you in 2 seconds. And I'm learning, and I'm taking notes, and I'm really immersing myself in this new martial art. And I'm like, this stuff doesn't work. Like, I can't do anything. I'm getting crushed like every day. This is ridiculous. And then I remember it was a Vegas Open, and this is back when they had the Vegas Open. And I remember my first match, and I clearly remember this moment where I'm like, oh, this shit's working. Like, excuse my language, but I was like, it's working. Like, everything that I've been taught, like it's coming together. And it takes those difficult times on the mat. It takes those, you know, being crushed by higher belts. It takes those little moments when people are just trying to encourage you, like, hey man, we've all had our week one, we've all had our month, you know, that kind of thing, to build you into that. I don't know. I don't even want to call it a person. You're a different being. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
it's just, you're a completely different being at that point. It's really cool.
It's awesome. And that was were you white belt or blue belt already?
White belt. Yeah, white
Nice.
belt. Yeah. So I did a couple of tournaments here locally, and I got destroyed. and I was very discouraged. And you know, I had like I said, I have a very supportive wife, and she's like, just keep pushing, just keep pushing. And yeah, I pushed through all those negative thoughts, and that was that was a great moment. And I knew, like, at that point, I was like, yeah, maybe this stuff works. Maybe I can do this. So yeah.
How old were
But
you at that tournament, Professor Alex? What was your age then?
40, I was 40. Yeah, I was almost 41. Yeah, I was 40
Almost
years old.
41. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just
So I
a
did my
youngster
first.
for me.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I hear people talk about like jujitsu after 30. I'm like, 30. I wish, man. That's yeah. But yeah, it's a completely different experience for those of you that haven't done it. I highly encourage, you know, just, you know, not so much tournament play, but get on the mats and just give it a try.
Yeah, that's a key. It's a key part of what we're doing here, is to move people from, not trying it to trying it. And at 40, um I'm curious what it meant to you, and then in the beginning part of your competitive life, because I know competition's important to you, like what your mindset was I'm curious after you won, like besides the fact that the techniques actually worked for you, which is a physical pleasure, right? Like, oh, I've been trying to learn this. Now I learned it. I was able to execute it well, which in my mind is a part of that learning that you talked about on your first, like, okay, you got through throwing up to not throwing up to being in shape to not having the techniques to having the techniques, like being able to be patient, as you said, through that process. As a you know somebody in their 40s who was competing, what did it mean to you? Like, did you see yourself, well, I'm a better competitor, or was you more internally focused, like I've overcome my internal blockage to get to there? What were you thinking about?
Well, it's a number of things. I don't know that I had overcome a lot of the head trash yet. There was still a lot of things going on in my brain that would not allow me to enjoy the moment. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to explain. You know, when you have somebody. I always use this analogy where when you're teaching kids versus teaching adults. Kids are like, okay, this is brand new to me. I'm a little nervous. Maybe I don't want to do it because other people are watching. Adults will tell you what they can't do, like right off the bat. Oh, I can't do that.
Right.
Okay, that's all head trash.
Mm-hmm.
That is 100% head trash. And I had it. I literally had it. And it was like, you know, what am I doing? And then I'm hanging out with these, I mean, they're kids for all intents and purposes. You know, they're 25, 30 years old kids to me. And, and we're traveling and doing tournaments, and I'm winning, and we're all, doing great. And in the back of my head, I'm like, well, I'm just an old guy fighting old guys. So what does it matter? I didn't realize that a 40-year-old or 42-year-old, whatever I was at the time when I was thinking about this, they don't do this stuff. They don't put themselves in these positions, right? They're watching other people play sports and drinking beer. You know, like I am being an example to this 25-year-old of what you can do in your mid 40s and in your 50s. I'm 50 years old. Right. So that was a big shift in mindset for me. It was going from, hey, I'm just trying to survive this, to, hey, I think I'm doing this, to, hey, I want to be an example for the next generation. This is my turn to be the example. So,
yeah, I love that. And I have that same disposition as it relates to trying to model what you can do at any point in time in your life. And for me, it is giving up the notion that I have to be the best whatever in the room. Like, I'm generally the worst player in the class, and for me, it's a focus on I won't always be that, right? And that I started the day before my 50th birthday. And my children and my parents and my wife basically said, so let me understand this. So you're going to pay money to go get beat up by younger, stronger guys. And I was like, exactly. This is just going to be a great way. So, however, I know among my peer group and from my kids, I want to say there's no point in time in your life that you can't do whatever it is you want to do. You may
Correct.
have to change your notion of like what degree you can do it to. Like I have limitations to my body that is a reflection of years of use that resulted in injury. So I don't have pristine joints. I don't have, I have things that I simply cannot do, and I have to be careful. So I have to have a certain humility, about that. And it's funny. I mean, Professor Lucas. I mean, you even at I mean, everybody feels like they're not young, but like, right, you're 20 years younger than Professor Alex and I, and you're 20 years older than the you that started jujitsu.
Yeah.
So like Professor Lucas at the beginning to now, that's like a 40-year span of like experience. But even you, I think, have had to adjust your perspective in your game.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Every week they try just something.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
always for that, right? Like maybe pushing too much or just being too stubborn or just trying to, especially when you're younger, right? Like you just
Hmm.
focus on the result instead of the process, things
Yes.
like that you learn over time. And Professor Alex Peter keeps saying that about his joints and everything. And during the class, he can barely lift his shoulders. But on the moment that the referee went to raise his arm, he's all day up doing handstandings and everything, backflips and everything else.
Yeah. Yeah. It's those quiet guys that you got to worry about. Yeah. That's funny, man. Yeah. But yeah, you're just talking about the progression throughout and going through I think it's a lot of mental barriers to people, Pete, talking about like being able to do things at any age.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of mental barriers. I get that. And those can be overcome. I think the hardest thing for people our age to
Hmm.
overcome, and even somebody in their 30s to overcome, is what are you willing to give up to compete at the highest level you can possibly compete at, right?
Right.
I am never going to beat kid that's been training since they were, a child, in their early 30s or mid 20s. It's never going to happen. But maybe someone in their 50s, right? He and I go head to head, I've got a shot, right? What am I willing to give up to be able to compete against that person at the highest level? A lot of people aren't willing to give up friends. I have friends that I love, man. I love them, but they're cigar smoking, bourbon drinking, watching basketball and football. I'm just not that guy. And every time I see them, it's hugs and I love yous, but I'm not going to be around you. I'm sorry. I've got other things. So I think that's the biggest thing to overcome. What are you willing to give up? And I think just the notion of having to give something up is scary to people
Right.
because there's no guarantee on what you're going to gain by giving that up.
And I think that's an incremental process for most people, right? I mean, when we talk to people, Professor and I would talk to someone about what they eat, right?
Mm.
Like, well, can we stop soda? And that's perceived as giving something up. However, once they realize, like, oh my gosh, just that change alone
Yeah.
moves them in a direction that they want to go. And as you talk about, Professor Alex, like your jujitsu is happening throughout the day. I mean, we could use other terms, right? I mean, people with a spiritual discipline could, it could be described differently, but a mindful approach to your life and where all your decisions are connected to like, well, what's the impact of the decision? And many people don't think about it. And food for me is just the clearest example, right? Because they're not thinking about what that fast food means to them. So in my mind, like what do you give up becomes over time, like what are you gaining? And so you love those friends and you gain a relationship with them that's healthy because you're not compromising the way you want to live your life, which is, revolves around healthy things to, to trade doing what they are doing, cigar smoking and bourbon. Not that that doesn't have its place in certain, increments, right? But
Absolutely.
um, so
And let me add this, Peter. I
yeah,
think sometimes you forget when you're talking about performance and the best as you can be and the things that you're going to give up. It's not about only the time that you're spending on the training, right? You're going to train, let's suppose you train every day, which sometimes most of the case for general average people, it won't happen, right? Maybe going to be like 2 or 3 times a week. and that's going to be an hour, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever. What are you going to do for the rest of the day?
Right.
Right. So yes, the training session, it will of course build all the technique, muscle memory, and everything else. But for you to be able to perform all this, whatever you're doing outside that class, outside that training session, is what's gonna make the huge difference. So that goes like about your sleeping, about your breathing,
That's
about hydrating, about what you're eating, right, and everything.
And so this experience, what you've described to me, Professor Alex, super personal. Like it became something that you started with and as a physical thing, right? Like you wanted to feel better, you wanted to get, return to being in shape and all the rest of it. So it becomes something that feeds you personally, but over time, jiu-jitsu seems to become a larger and larger part of your life. And then it seems that it becomes not just something that you do for yourself, but it becomes now your business life. So can you talk a little bit about how, as you developed a business around something you love, how did that change your relationship to jiu-jitsu? Because now it's something that doesn't reside outside your economic life, but it's also feeding you and your family. I mean, that's a whole different ballgame than always being on the receiving end, right? Receiving instruction, having the community built for you. Now you're the person at the head of that ship, with this thing that you love. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, Peter, when you put it that way, I'm like nervous now. Like, what do you do? Oh, shit. I got to feed my family with this. No, but it started off really small. So and I'm sorry if I'm going the long way around this.
No,
It started
take
off
your
really
time.
small. I was helping the kids coach one day a week.
Mm-hmm.
Next thing you know, I am the kids coach.
Mm-hmm.
Next thing you know, I get responsibilities to be the 6 a.m. coach. And then next thing you know, I'm opening an academy. And, I've had a lot of friends ask me because, my friends, they know how passionate I am about this, but they're always asking me like, well, it must be kind of a bummer now that you're, kind of like opening an academy. You're so busy, you're doing all this stuff and you're not really just, just training anymore. I think of it as differently. I think of it very differently. I saw my life change
Mm-hmm.
just with jujitsu. And then I was helping people develop as a coach. And not only was I helping people develop, I was developing because I was studying and, making sure I was right and, just understanding the systems and concepts. And that grew my jujitsu IQ, I guess you could call it.
Sure.
But then I'm watching people develop, right? Now, as an academy owner, I'm watching people's lives change.
Yeah.
Like that in and of itself is worth the price of admission, man. Like
Right.
I had a student that has every reason not to train. Okay. He has every physical attribute I've seen people with like a dislocated thumb or a hurt thumb that won't train for a month. This guy's got every other reason, right? Bigger reasons than that.
Right.
And he trains every day. And he fights through the pain and he does a little meditation, some yoga stuff, some breathing just to get through the pain. And I sat with him once and I'm kind of, as an owner, right? As a jiu-jitsu academy owner, you're sitting there like, are you okay?
Yeah.
And he looked at me dead in the face and he says, Coach, this is the best investment I've ever made in myself.
Yes.
I had a hard time. I'm on the verge of tears all the time anyway. So
Yeah,
I had
right,
a really hard time holding that back, but
Sure.
that's what it's all about, man. That's it. That's it. That's the price of admission, man. That's awesome.
It is. It is. I can. Well, I just second you like on everything that you're saying. That transformation that's become not just part of your life, but who you are.
Yeah.
And then you see moments like this, right? That all the hard work, all the late nights, the early mornings, the going through the pain all the time to be able to do your very best for all the students and for the community. And then you see things like that happen. And then you see on the little things that you need, the whole community embrace, and not just you, for everyone. And then we have also like 1,000 of different examples on our school. The brotherhood, right? That's just amazing, and that's like it pays every minute. It's awesome.
Yeah. And that's one thing I tell people, especially today. We spend a lot of time alone. And when you spend a lot of time alone, you feel alone. That's just the way it is. And, I tell people, be part of a community. I don't care what community is. If
Right.
you want to, be, in a sewing circle, if you want to do CrossFit, if you want to do jujitsu. But one thing I can tell you about the jujitsu community is when something goes bad, we rally. The
Yes.
whole community rallies, and it was really evident when a friend of mine, John Wagner, was going through a hard time, and Professor Paul Nava just put, he just put it out there like, hey, we're going to do a fundraiser, and it's going to be an all-day fundraiser, and I think there was like, I don't know, like 12 different seminars going on just
I
throughout
was
the day.
there.
Yes. And that was, and I wanted to point that out, Professor Lucas, because
It was
when you
awesome.
guys showed up and Professor Flavio showed up,
Yeah.
and by the way, he looks like a friggin' superhero. He's got to wear a cape. You know what I mean? He should wear a cape, right? He should. Well, he was standing by the glass and the sun was in my eyes, and he's standing like this. Like, this guy's amazing, dude. But Professor Gustavo Dantes. I mean, you name it. That to me is what it's all about. It's like, what more could you ask for in a community than, hey, here's the signal, we need help, and everybody shows up. That was awesome. Yeah,
True.
We've seen that with us in similar manners. And one thing that is, the universe likes to remind me on time to time is how like the difference between what a problem is, like what you think a problem is day to day, and what a real problem is. And we have had folks that in an instant, all of a sudden, they have a real problem. Something has happened, and it has been a pleasure of mine to see how people who came together for something that they didn't think would have an emotional context, going in for this training, all of a sudden have such deep emotional connection to folks that started in a way that, hey, we're just rolling on the mats, and then um, it revealed so much about themselves, that process. And in the process of revealing things to themselves, getting to know themselves better, it allowed them to form relationships with people differently, because they understand themselves better. And in that process, they're closer to that. And that, to me, I think you say it very well, like that is what it's all about. And I think it's what it's all about, period. Like, not just as jiu-jitsu, but just in terms of what are we doing here as human beings?
yeah.
We're here to make the most of our time in terms of the development of our individual self, but we're also here in community with each other. And yeah, that's such a beautiful idea. I would have a feeling I got 6 or 7 more hours worth of questions, but I'm going to kind of take us into the final turn here. If you were going to speak to our audience, to the folks that are trying to decide, like, hey, I appreciate everything you're saying, but it just doesn't look like it's for me. And the profession, I like to say, jiu-jitsu is in fact for everyone. And could you talk to that person a little bit? Like, so make, if you would, our 2 final comments, like talk to that person, and then to the blue belt who we want to avoid the blue belt curse, where they're like, they just can't see why they should continue on. Could you give those 2 people messages?
Well, when people talk about changing their or improving their lives, I don't like using the word changing, because I believe that you're doing the best version of you, and you're the only one that can do that right. So if you want to improve your life, they always say, step out of your comfort zone, do something different, do something difficult, blah, 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 blah. But what if you could put yourself in a position to do that every single day at will? You could show up multiple times a day and do difficult things, do things out of your comfort zone every single day. Jiu-jitsu offers that opportunity to everybody. So don't think of it as a task. Don't think of it as a physical task. Think of it as an opportunity to put yourself in those difficult situations. If you do hard things every single day, when a hard time comes, you've got that muscle built. You're ready for hard times, right? So if you're trying to get out of your comfort zone, that's another thing, man. People think about like public speaking, right? Out of your comfort zone. You can't do that every day. You can do jiu-jitsu every day. You can go to Professor Lucas and ask questions and improve and get yourself out of your comfort zone and improve your improve yourself. I think that's, in and of itself, is worth walking into the academy, walking into a Gracie Baja Academy, and putting on that gi and just stepping on the mats. That feel of the mats on your feet, it's addictive, man. That's like sacred ground to me. I love it. I can't describe it. You know what I mean? I just love, I it's hard to describe, man. I love washing bees. I love coming home tired. I love being sore. I love sitting in the sauna. I love the whole recovery process. I can go on and on, but
Right.
put yourself in a position to do difficult things and watch yourself improve, watch your life improve, watch your relationship with your family improve, watch your relationship at work improve, watch you go from an average salesperson to an extremely successful one, just because you're doing difficult things every day. You're at will.
Right.
So that would be my message for people afraid to step through the door. I get it, but do it. For the blue belt, it's honestly all about setting goals. It's all about setting goals. If things become mundane, now don't get me wrong, getting a blue belt is really difficult.
Right.
That is not an easy task. So I understand when people do the task and like, whoo, I'm done, right? But when I was a white belt, I had it in my head. This is a 40-year-old, by the way, thinking this. I'm going to be the best white belt in the room. Never happened. I got my blue belt. I'm going to be the best blue belt in the room. Never happened. Purple belt, same thing. Brown belt, same thing. But I set goals to be undeniable, right? I am going to be undeniable for that next belt. There's going to be, whenever I'm making a decision, a business decision or anything like that, it's got to be a no-brainer. If it's not a hell yes, it's a no, right? So
nice.
I want to make myself that person in the academy when Professor Lucas looks at, broke, busted up 43-year-old Alex and, he's going to get his blue belt. I want Professor Lucas to go, yeah, of course he's going to get his blue belt, right?
Right.
That's the person you want to be. Of course, you're going to get your purple belt. Of course, you're ready to coach for us. Of course, you're ready to take on this class. Of course, you're ready for your black belt, right? That's the person you need to be. And I think just building those goals, right? Setting those goals to be the best person, the best version of you on the mat every single day, be undeniable. Trust me, you will not think about quitting.
Yeah. I think that
That's
muscle of, I can't do it to I can do it. Like experiencing it's hard and now I can do it is a muscle that applies to everything. And jiu-jitsu is you can distill that down to something really measurable.
Yeah.
And so I love what you're saying. I'm gonna Professor Lucas, before we kind of head into the very final thing, anything else that you would want to either say or ask before we go to the conclusion here?
No, just like everything that Professor Alex already said today, I just agree 100%. I think especially those last two messages for people get there first, that push to start in, knowing that what your expectations are, and set your goals, right? Like walk into a place that you have no idea what's going on is always hard because you don't know like I said, you don't know what's going on, right? But when you understand that it might be a struggle, it might be a challenge, but little by little, you're going to overcome the challenge and you're going to do it again, you're going to do it again, you're going to do it again. The challenge is always going to be there, but how you're gonna your mindset to deal with that is what is going to change and make things fun and improve ourselves as a human being. For blue belts, let's keep going. Love it. I love everything you say, Professor Alex. And a lot of that we talk about here is to encourage people to do jiu-jitsu and find like a great academy, someone that you really trust and believe, right? And we represent different teams in tournaments, but we fight under the same flag, jiu-jitsu, martial arts flag, and it's awesome to all the thoughts is in common, like it's the same goal. We just want to improve ourselves, we want to challenge ourselves, we want to change people's lives, and jiu-jitsu is our tool to do that. So thanks so much for everything, Professor Alex.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So Professor Alex, let's before we say goodbye, let's tell everybody where they can find you in your various ways. So can you tell us tell us about your podcast, about your academy, maybe your Instagram handle? Where can people learn more about you? Because my guess is there's lots of folks who are like, man, how do I learn about that guy?
Well, thank you. I always lead with the YouTube channel. We are the BJJ Foxcast on YouTube. Please like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. And I'm going to be the next subscriber at Submission Coffee, I promise. You can also find me about 7 days a week at the Academy. It's Aries East Mesa Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy off of Ellsworth and Guadalupe in Mesa, Arizona. I absolutely love that area. I love the vibe. I love the people in that area. I live about 20 miles away, but it's fantastic to just be in that on that side of town. You can also find us on Instagram, the BJJ Foxcast. Yeah, and Aries East Mesa BJJ on Instagram as well. And yeah, if you guys are ever in around our area, I would love to invite you in and get some rounds in.
Yeah,
Awesome.
well, I'm taking a field trip out there. I'm
you
gonna
go.
I'm gonna see you. I have great respect for your perspective and who you are. I will tell you, my first sighting was at this tournament, and it was really impressive to me the way that your students and the members of your academy oriented themselves to you. It was clear to me that they had love and affection and respect for you, and that was evident in even not listening or whatever, just in the way they held themselves in relationship to you. I think if you come and take a field trip down to see us, you would see very much the same dynamic between Professor Lucas and that. We love Professor Lucas. He's not just our professor. We love him as a human being, and his wife, Paul, is there. And he creates a community that is very much like what you described there. So as listeners, as you go and evaluate your local jiu-jitsu school to see if it's right for you, you should know now that this is it's possible out there for you to find places like us, because we think that jiu-jitsu lends itself to a certain pattern of thinking, a certain way of treating each other. Professor Lucas talked about this in an earlier episode, in that it takes time, not just skill, to become a black belt. Like jiu-jitsu won't award a black belt without a certain amount of time going on. And I think that the maturity that comes along with age and experience matters, in particularly when we talk about a martial art, because the martialness of things requires a development of wisdom. It's clear to me you have a lot of wisdom, Professor Alex, and I'm grateful you spent time with us. So with that, we're gonna wrap things up. We're gonna take field trips out there to see Professor Alex at some point in time, and I think there's so much to talk about. Maybe we'll get a chance to do this again. So thank you.
That would be great, and I would love to get you guys into the studio here and do a podcast with you, because I think, like you said, we've got about 2.5 hours of stuff we could talk about.
Sounds great.
Maybe the part 2.
Yes, I love it. I love it.
Part 2.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you guys.
Thank you very much.